everybody. Happy Monday. So, Stephanie, no government shutdown. Surprise, surprise.
I'm not
And-
surprised at
right,
all.
exactly. That was pure sarcasm on my part. So, in the words of Democrat Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, today we have, quote, very good news for the country. Democrats and Republicans have come to an agreement and the government will remain open. We've avoided a shutdown. Bipartisanship, which has been a trademark of the Senate, has prevailed, and the American people can breathe a sigh of relief, end quote. But is this really good news? And should we be breathing a sigh of relief? Like personally, I'm torn, but that's purely from a selfish perspective because I'm getting on an international flight on Tuesday and a government shutdown would have totally fucked up my travel plans. Like we talked last week about how it would have severely affected the FAA. And I can only imagine what the TSA lines would be like with even fewer incompetent government employees working. But from a broader perspective of what's in the best interest of America, I think this is just another band-aid of bullshit and a clear sign that we actually have no power in government.
I know. I felt bad after last week because I was like, let it fucking shut down. And then you're like, well, I have my flight. And I was like, oh, yeah, sorry. Never mind. I don't know. I'm just so fatigued with this whole government shutdown nonsense because the same exact story plays out every damn time. So instead of talking about it, I'm just going to play a clip from Florida Rep. Kat Kamick. I think she does a really good job of explaining what happened and why it happened. So take a listen to her.
Now, there's a lot of people out there who use the term CR pretty loosely, and I just want to put it out here. A CR is a continuing resolution. A continuing resolution is a rubber stamp of the previous year's spending. So in this case, that would have been a clean rubber stamp with no modifications to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Biden's spending. That is unacceptable. We are in the majority. We are not going to rubber stamp Nancy Pelosi's budget. However, because we had 21 who said no, and we have members in the Congress who said no shutdown, that left very little wiggle room. So the deal that was put on the table today was we're going to fund the government for 45 days with a clean CR. So a rubber stamp of Nancy Pelosi's spending, no cuts, no modifications, and disaster spending.
We totally called it.
Yeah.
Same shit every time. They threaten a shutdown. The Republicans can't get on the same page. So the Democrats win. Like no cuts to the outrageous spending that is going on. And even though the Republicans are in the majority, nothing's gonna happen because they can't get their shit together. So I'm just at the point where I literally can't even talk about it because it's so ridiculous. And I think that a high school student council is more effective at planning, budgeting, and spending than our Congress. It's like complete joke.
Yeah, and what was even more of a joke was the way the whole thing played out to even reach this continuing resolution in the first place. Like pretty much everything that our government does, it was a total fucking clown show. The House was totally unable to unite. The Senate comes in with this strong opposition. I felt like I was watching a movie about like a really bad sports team, and it's like they're going to lose, but then at the end of the movie the losing team comes together and then they win the championship game. But like this is not that kind of movie. This is a movie where the team just keeps fucking losing over and over and over, and then eventually you just kind of lose interest in watching them play at all. And that's how I feel with our government. And so here we are with what equates to basically a 45-day extension of continuing to spend at these same ludicrous, insane levels. But I will say, at least the bill did not include more money to Ukraine, much to the dismay of the Democrats, although I assure you that funding is going to come in a second bill because they've already talked about that. And if nothing else, I hope that the 16 billion that they did agree on in disaster relief will actually go to disaster victims in the United States.
Yeah. I wish this was one of those like sports movies, but I feel like it's more of like an apocalyptic movie
Yes,
because
a
it's just
horror film.
constantly like, everything's falling apart.
Yeah.
But we have some good news. Well, I think it's good news for Monday. which is this whole like gender affirming care situation. I think everyone kind of knows how we feel about that based on past episodes. But Thursday was a really big win for parents and children when a federal appeals court ruled that Tennessee and Kentucky can enforce laws that ban gender affirming care for minors. So this includes hormone therapy, puberty blockers, and then any of those types of surgeries. An article in the Tennessean reads, quote, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee earlier this year signed into law the state's total ban on gender affirming healthcare for transgender children. The ACLU and other plaintiffs in April sued the state on behalf of 3 Tennessean families with transgender children who argued that they would be forced to leave the state to continue receiving what they say is life-saving healthcare, end quote. But I mean, we all know that California will take them. So, there's always that option. But Chief Judge Jeffrey Sutton wrote, quote, this is a relatively new diagnosis with ever-shifting approaches to care over the last decade or two. Under these circumstances, it is difficult for anyone to be sure about predicting the long-term consequences of abandoning age limits of any sort for these treatments, end quote. I completely agree with him on that. And then you have the Tennessee Attorney General, Jonathan Skrmetti, called it, quote, a win for democracy. Decisions that are not clearly resolved by the Constitution should be resolved by the people through their elected representatives, end quote. And so recently, there was some more news on this where a federal appeals court upheld a similar ban in Alabama, but federal district courts overturned bans in Florida, where I am, Georgia, and Arkansas. So this is probably going to end up going to the Supreme Court, and I'm assuming would end up, they would do the right thing since it's mostly conservative, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah, but what's really sad is like now there are up to 22 states that have had to implement these bans on gender affirming care for minors. And I really think that's like 22 states that have had this issue where they've had to institute these bans, and nearly all of them have been challenged in court. And I read an article in LGBTQ Nation, and the legal director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights, her name is Shannon Minter, and she called the decisions in Tennessee and Kentucky, quote, a serious blow to one of the most cherished principles of our legal system, which is that parents, not government officials, should make medical decisions for their children, end quote. And frankly, the hypocrisy of that statement just makes me laugh. Like, I'm going to take a wild guess that Shannon probably supports telling teachers that or supports teachers telling like confused children that they're transgender and in the wrong body and to become transgender and go through affirming care and hide it from their parents. So no, I totally disagree with you. And the ACLU of Kentucky legal director Corey Shapiro said, quote, the majority ignored the extensive evidence from actual medical experts and the trial courts who all agreed that this care is medically necessary, effective, and appropriate. End quote. So once again, no, Corey, what I think is necessary, effective, and appropriate is how about providing psychological support and therapy to these kids that are going through what every child goes through of a confused stage of life, and then give them the option to pursue, mutilating themselves when they become legal adults.
Exactly. I don't care if they want to do that when they're 18 or older,
Right.
but why are we doing that to children? And you're right, like it completely bypasses taking a mental health approach, giving them therapy, like having them talk it out first is just absolutely insane. And I'm glad that, it's probably going to end up in the Supreme Court because this nonsense is like harming so many kids.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another interesting story that happened recently, and it's been a little overshadowed with all the government nonsense, but the Federal Trade Commission and 17 state attorneys general are suing Amazon in this historical antitrust suit. And according to FTC.gov, the lawsuit alleges that Amazon is a monopolist that uses a set of interlocking anti-competitive and unfair strategies to illegally maintain its monopoly power. The FTC and its state partners say Amazon's actions allow it to stop rivals and sellers from lowering prices, degrade quality for shoppers, overcharge sellers, stifle innovation, and prevent rivals from fairly competing against Amazon. So this complaint alleges that Amazon violates the law, like not because it's become so big, but because it engages in a course of exclusionary conduct that prevents current competitors from growing and new competitors from emerging. So by stifling competition on price, product selection, quality, and by preventing its current or future rivals from attracting a critical mass of shoppers and sellers, Amazon assures that no current or future rival can threaten its dominance. So it goes on to say that Amazon's far reaching schemes impact hundreds of billions of dollars in retail sales every year. It touches hundreds of thousands of products sold by businesses that are big and small and affects over 100 million shoppers. So I just think that, not that I disagree with like some of that, but I think it's ironic that the government is suing Amazon for being a monopoly that's like taking control of the market when the government is the reason Amazon got that way. Like when
Right.
they locked down the country and they forced all of these small businesses to close, that's when Amazon had record growth. And then while other businesses like completely failed due to our government's COVID policies, Amazon became the dominant retailer in pretty much every product category. And I would also like to know how many people in our government, like especially in Congress, held stock in Amazon and profited from that, you
Oh,
know?
just like, yeah, just like every other big company that was allowed to stay
Yeah,
open during the pandemic. And I have such a love-hate relationship with Amazon because the
me
convenience
too.
truly is amazing. And I'm not gonna lie, like even during COVID, because I was a police officer at the time, and I remember when they, like shut down all the stores and everyone was going crazy buying toilet paper, and I was on shift and I couldn't go buy toilet paper because I was busy. And by the time I had a chance to go to the store, like they didn't have any. So what did I do? I went on Amazon and
Mhm.
I ordered like a 12 pack of toilet paper and paper towels, I think. And it just got delivered to my door and I didn't have to like try to fight the lines of at Costco. So Amazon is amazing because it really is convenient and I order so much shit from there. And I read this very interesting commentary about this in the Epic Times, and the author's name was Jeffrey Tucker. And he was saying that the FTC has a really weak case because even though Amazon generates more than 538 billion in annual revenue, which is more than any other public company in the world except for Walmart, Amazon technically accounts for less than a third of the total e-commerce sales in the United States over the last 4 quarters, which is really not a monopoly. He wrote, quote, "That's not a monopolist if the relevant market here is digital sales. If the market is ebooks alone, that's another matter. And this speaks to a major issue. What is the relevant market here? Amazon sells just about everything and competes with just about everybody. There is no metric that can establish the company as a dictator over price. It competes just like everyone else. The government must prove some kind of exploitation via some kind of economic formula. They have to demonstrate some sort of harm to consumers, other competitors, and society at large. Why would exploited consumers continue to use Amazon if they're being exploited and there are so many other options? Why would producers continue to list their products on the site if they don't benefit?" And he further wrote, "Will anything good come from this FTC effort? Highly doubtful. Will anything bad happen? The markets don't seem to think so. The Amazon stock price did not move much on the news." So while I totally agree with you that like this was totally created by the government, so completely hypocritical to turn around and be upset about it. But I guess we'll see if this lawsuit ends up being a waste of time or not.
Yeah, and it's a good point too. It's like if consumers don't like it or like the prices, they won't shop there. And if
Yeah.
the sellers don't like the fees and everything, they won't do that. Kind of like it's just for the government to stay out of it and let the market just do its thing, you
Mhm.
know? Like that's my take on it. Okay, so something that I completely, I guess, missed just because we're always so focused on what's happening here in the United States is that Europe is facing its own migration crisis with 7,000 migrants from North Africa that arrived on an Italian island called Lampedusa in the span of 48 hours, which completely overwhelmed this small island because they only have a population of like 6,000. So totally caught them off guard. And I didn't realize apparently over 125,000 migrants have entered Italy just this year alone. So Elon Musk weighed in on this. He posted on X. I still have like the hardest
I
time
know.
saying X. I always want to call it Twitter. But anyways, he posted, quote, "There are currently 8 German NGO ships in the Mediterranean Sea collecting illegal immigrants to be unloaded in Italy. These NGOs are subsidized by the German government. Let's hope AFD wins the elections to stop this European suicide," end quote. So then the German Foreign Office replied very quickly, and they just said, quote, "Yes, it's called saving lives," end quote. So then Musk replied, quote, "So you're actually proud of it. Interesting. Frankly, I doubt that a majority of German public supports this. Have you run a poll? Surely it's a violation of the sovereignty of Italy for Germany to transport vast numbers of illegal immigrants to Italian soil. Has invasion vibes," end quote. So this is exactly what crossed my mind. Like, just because we've talked about all these single military aged men crossing the southern border here in the United States. And like, these aren't just people from Mexico or South America, they're people from China, Africa, like all these other countries that are not allies. Then you have our allies in Europe now being invaded at their border, and they have a bunch of single military aged men. Like there's all these videos going around social media, and it's like 100% young men. So I get what he's saying, where it's like this has invasion vibes. And we're calling them migrants, but I feel like it's more of an army of illegals that's just coming here, and they're setting up base in the United States and the European Union. Um, and I found a clip that I want to play. This is from a Polish representative that stands up to the EU's stance on allowing illegal immigration.
Most unemployment in European Union is Poland. The highest GDP after COVID in European Union is Poland. One of the lowest debts in European Union is Poland. So don't give us this rubbish about the need of educated immigration. We don't need your doctors. We don't need your engineers. Take them all and pay for them. We don't need them. You know why? Because there's a 0 terrorist attacks in Poland. Why? Because there's no illegal migration in Poland. So don't give me this look. Don't give me these arguments about the populism, because this is a fact. This is your data.
I mean, I agree with him. I think he makes
love
way
that.
too much sense, right?
I wish we had a leader that would stand up like that.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and he just, I don't know, like he was saying everything that I think most of us are thinking, but I don't know if I feel better or worse knowing that Europe is just as idiotic as we are with these open borders.
I've been so focused on the migrant crisis here in the United States that I really haven't paid much attention to what's happening in Europe until you brought up this topic. And then I read an article that came out yesterday in the Washington American University Radio, and it said that between January and September 24th of this year, there have been 186,000 African migrants that have arrived in Europe. And then most of them are in Italy, Greece, Spain, Cyprus, and Malta. And like you said earlier, Italy is receiving most of them. Like this article, you said 125,000. This article said over 130,000. And then the article was also talking about how more than 2,500 migrants have either died or gone missing while trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea. And like, since you brought up the migrant issue, I have to bring this up too, because I know that my go-to for all of the latest migrant news in the US is NYC, but I want to talk about what's going on in the sanctuary city of Chicago, because that is also apparently a huge shit show, to the point where city council members met last Friday to debate whether or not Chicago should remain a sanctuary city. So there was an article in the WGN9 News that said the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, has spent $328 million in state aid to manage Chicago's migrant crisis. And I guess there are currently around 15,000 migrants, which, coming from Texas, to me, that's not a crisis when you consider the amount that come over the border in Texas. But I guess these migrants in Chicago are being housed in police stations and airports because they don't have migrant shelters. And so the city of Chicago is housing hundreds of migrants inside a bus shelter at Terminal 1 of the Chicago O'Hare International Airport. And the area is reportedly like smaller than a city block. It's covered by these large black curtains that they've fastened shut with staples. And there's up to 150 migrants at a time sleeping on cardboard pads on the floor. They're sharing airport bathrooms. And what's really creepy is like they're all being monitored by a private firm that was hired by the city that monitors like who comes in and out of the contained area. And like that totally has like vibes of the Jews during World War II, where they were like, confined to these little cities and monitored. And because they're so cramped, like migrants are starting to spread out into the terminal and they're sleeping along the windows, like beyond the curtain. And this article was saying how like travelers are passing by on the, with their luggage and like taking pictures of these migrant families. And this was supposed to be like, they called it a quote, stop and go place for the migrants to just stay there for a day or two. But some migrants have been staying at the airport for weeks, and then they get moved to police stations. And like one volunteer said, it was, quote, very concerning. It's not just a safety matter, but a public health matter. And then I read this article in the Associated Press talking about how quickly sickness is spreading in the airport, and that the staffing company provides limited first aid and they just keep calling ambulances. And there was a volunteer team of doctors who visited over the summer, and like their supplies were immediately decimated. And then I guess migrants are also living at Midway International Airport. And then I read an article from ABC7 Chicago that reported yesterday that last week there were 353 migrant-related ambulance calls from police stations, shelters, and the airport. And so now we have winter as a come-in, right? In Chicago, it fucking snows, it gets below zero, it's cold as fuck. So now the city is planning to build a $29 million, quote, base camp of winterized tents. Like, when are these liberal governors and citizens of liberal cities finally going to stand up and demand the fucking border be closed? Like, their cities are getting completely destroyed.
I know. And that's the thing. It's like they don't want to admit it because that would just go against their narrative. So they let this continue on like way too long. And I mean, O'Hare was already a dump, and like
Right.
there was a huge homeless problem there. People, there was a lot of crime, which I think is interesting. They have all this security at airports, but then they're going to allow this just
Right.
hanging out like in a terminal. And that made me think. I had watched an interview like a week ago, and it was a border patrol agent that was talking about all these illnesses. And he's like, if people knew what was coming into this country, you would be horrified. And he's like, there's all the normal stuff, like a lot of tuberculosis and COVID and like all that kind of stuff. But he's like, we also get these cases of people that have this like weird fungus that like takes over your body and you die like very quickly, and it's horrific. And he's like, we don't want this stuff coming into our country and spreading.
Right.
And yet no one's really talking about it, and it's just kind of flying under the radar. And I think it's really funny how all of these, extreme leftists that are so like about the COVID vaccine and lockdowns are letting all of these diseases just pour into our country completely unchecked. Like no one's
Right.
talking about that aspect of it. So it's like total hypocrisy, like always.
As is always. Yeah, I was just going to say, it's always hypocrisy from the left.
Ugh, so crazy. It just like it makes you so mad. And that is why I haven't gone back to Chicago to visit my family in years and probably won't anytime soon.
Oh my God, right. I forgot you were from there. So,
yeah.
yeah.
And I thought it was a dump then. Like I don't even want to know what it's like now. So
Well, avoid Terminal 1.
yeah, definitely not flying in there. All right. Well, that's what's going on so far for this week. I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of shit shows happening. So we'll keep you guys updated as we go. I hope everyone has a great week, and thanks for listening.